Good afternoon, Ms. Marsh.
Good afternoon, Vic.
Now, Ms. Marsh, you sat for a video deposition like this about a year ago. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
What I want to do today is update the court on what happened to you since last year. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. So when we last left the scene was July of 2012. And did you have a photo ID at that time?
No, I didn't.
And did you have any kind of photo ID?
No.
So as of last July, you did not have the kind of ID that would be required to allow you to vote.
That's right.
Now, at some point after July of 2012, did you learn about a new ID that might allow you to vote?
Yes.
And do you remember when you learned about that?
You mean what month?
Yes.
I think it was around in July.
And do you know when that ID was going to be available?
I think in August, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. And do you know what that ID was called?
A voter's ID.
Now, did you know where you had to go to get this ID?
Yes, license down in Rochester, Pennsylvania.
And did you know what it is you needed to bring to get this ID?
Yes, my granddaughter called to find out, and they gave her different things.
Did your granddaughter send an email to the Department of State to ask about what kind of documents you needed?
Yes.
And do you remember when that was? That late
Maybe in July. Might have been the 1st of August.
I'm going to mark this as Marsh Exhibit 1. I'm showing you what's been marked as Marsh Exhibit 1. Have you seen this before?
Yes.
Okay. Is this the email that your granddaughter sent to the Department of State?
Yes, it is.
And who is your granddaughter? Do you use the internet, Miss Marsh?
No, I don't.
Do you use email?
No.
Do you know how to use those?
No.
And what's the date on this email that you see at the top?
August 25.
And in this email, is she asking to clarify what kind of documents you need?
Yes.
And do you know if she got a response to that email?
Yes, she did.
Did she get a response the first time she sent it, or did she have to send more emails?
She had to call again for another one.
Okay. Let me mark this as Marsh Exhibit 2. I've handed you what's marked as Marsh Exhibit 2. Have you seen this before?
Yes.
And at the top there, it says, "This is my second email."
Right.
And is this an email from your granddaughter's?
Yes.
And at the top there, it says, "I have not received a response regarding the below email."
Right.
Is that right?
Right.
Do you know whether she got a response to the second email, or did she have to send another
She
one?
had to send a third one, yes.
Let's mark this as Marsh Exhibit 3. show you what's marked as Marsh Exhibit 3. Have you seen this one before?
Yes.
And at the top it says, this is my third request for information. Is that right?
Yes.
And what's the date at the top on this one?
August 30th,
Right. And
2012.
and the first one she sent on August the 25th?
Correct.
And do you know if she got a response to this third email?
Yes.
She did. Let's mark this as Marsh Exhibit 4. I show you what's marked as Marsh Exhibit 4. Is this the response that your granddaughter received from the Department of State?
Yes.
And at the top, the first message there is from your granddaughter to the Department of State saying thank you for the response. Is that right?
Yes.
And then below that, it says our apology for the slow response.
Uh-huh.
So
Yes.
this finally told you what forms you needed to bring.
Yes.
Now, did you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles right away after this?
You mean after I was notified?
Yes.
I think I did, maybe within a few days. I just forget how.
Was this a time that you got sick?
Oh, maybe it was, and that held me back for, maybe a week.
Maybe
Okay.
a couple weeks?
Couple weeks, maybe? Okay.
You don't remember exactly
No,
when that was? Okay. Now, what town are we in here now?
You mean right here where I live? This is
And it's in what county?
Beaver County.
And how close is the nearest bus?
Bus,
Yes.
I guess at the airport. That's I really don't know, because I never, traveled any.
And how far is the airport from here?
Oh, about 15, 20 minutes.
Driving.
Yes.
And you don't drive?
No.
You've never driven?
No.
You've never had a license?
No.
How close is the nearest train?
Probably in Swickley or maybe even Pittsburgh. I'm not really sure.
So that's further.
Sure.
So you live out past Pittsburgh International Airport?
Yeah, oh yes. Beyond it, yeah.
Now, how many licensing centers are there? Or let's focus on August or September of 2012. How many PennDOT licensing centers were there in Beaver County?
That's the only one I know of, is in Rochester.
Let's mark this as Marsh Exhibit 5. I show you what's been marked as Marsh Exhibit 5. Did your granddaughter look up on the internet how to get to and how far the licensing place is from your house?
Yes.
And if you look on the top left, next to A, is that your address here at the house?
Yes.
And what's the address at B? Is that where it says Stewart Avenue, Rochester?
Yes.
What is that?
That's the driver's where I had to go for my ID.
And below that it says either 22.55 or 24.87 miles, depending which way to go. Is that about the distance, do you know?
Yes.
And it says 38 or 39 minutes.
Yes.
Do you recall how long it took you to get there?
My daughter and I'd say close to an hour, if not an hour. Yeah.
Now, since you went to Rochester, and we'll talk about that in a minute, has PennDOT moved the licensing center
You
here?
mean since I've been down there?
Yes.
Yes, yes, they have.
And do you know when they moved it?
I know it was shortly after we were there the third trip.
And do you know where they moved it to?
Yes, to Chippewa.
And is that closer or farther
That's
from here?
farther than East Rochester.
And do you know how long it would take you to get there now?
Probably over an hour.
And do you know how far that is?
I'm not really sure, Vic.
And did you know exactly when you could go to the licensing center in Rochester to get the ID? Do you know hours of operation?
Yes, Suzanne checked them.
And Suzanne's your granddaughter?
Yes.
Mark this as March 6th. I show you what's marked as Marsh Exhibit 6. Is this a printout of a website for the East Rochester Driver
Yes.
License Center?
Yes.
And is this what your granddaughter looked at to find out when you could go to get an ID?
Correct.
And does it have hours when the center is open?
It does here, yes.
And did you and your granddaughter and your daughter look at those hours in deciding when you could go?
Yes, we did.
And do you remember what day you went?
I think it was on a Monday for the first trip.
And what hours was that open on Monday?
8:30 to 4:15, I think.
Now, on the bottom of that page, it says, please note that the hours for the photo license center and the driver's license center might differ, even though they are located in the same building. Is that something that you noticed or paid attention to?
No.
Does it say anywhere on either of the two pages here that to get an ID, you can't do it on a Monday?
No, it doesn't.
So you went to the Rochester Licensing Center on Monday, September 17th?
Yes.
And how did you get there?
My daughter took me.
Does your daughter work?
Yes.
What does she do?
She's a registered nurse.
And was this her day off?
Yes, Monday was.
So she had to take you to get this ID?
Yes.
And it took you how long to get there on that day?
At least an hour, if not more, yeah.
And what happened when you got to the licensing center on the first trip?
Yeah, well, we waited a while, but then we found out they were closed.
How long did you wait?
Oh, I'd say we were there at least a half hour before we really found out. Yes.
And so what did you find out? Because the office was open, right? The building?
Yes, the building was open, and there was another door that we could have went in for other things, but the one for the license was closed.
And were there other people there that day that you observed who were also there to get an ID?
I think there was some that I know of, yes.
And was anybody able to get an ID on that day?
No.
Because the ID center within the
Right.
building was not open on Mondays.
No. It was closed on Monday.
And is this a special Monday or was this
No,
every
this
Monday?
was just, yes.
And so how long were you at the licensing center total for that day?
Maybe an hour and a half.
And then you had to drive back home
Yes.
with your daughter. And how long that take?
close to an hour.
So you spent about 3 to 3.5 hours that day
Yes.
trying to get an ID,
Yes.
and were not successful.
No.
Did they tell you when you could come back to get an ID?
Well, again, Suzanne found out, I could go any other day of the week, I guess. So we went
And how did she find out?
by, the calling and being told what I had to take and everything. Yes.
So did you go back the next day?
Yes.
And who did you go with this time?
My daughter.
So she had to take another day
Yes.
off.
And take me, yeah.
And how long did it take you on the second day?
The wait inside,
I'm sorry,
just
the
the
drive.
traveling, it was close to an hour.
And when you got there, what happened?
It was a long wait. It was just packed with people. I know we waited for a good hour and a half to go in.
And what happened after that hour and a half when you went in?
They just did not know what we were even talking about.
And what did you ask for?
We told them that I was there for a voter's ID card, and I could get one through the Pennsylvania License Department, But they just didn't seem to know, anything about it.
And how many different PennDOT people did you work with that day?
There was, I think, 3 at the desks.
And nobody knew what you were
No.
talking about?
They said that, to kind of wait and I'd hear from Harrisburg or something, about it.
So did they make you do anything that day?
I think I had to fill out a form or something while I was there and all that,
And then what happened? Did they give you an ID?
No, not that day. No, they just didn't know what to do or anything,
Did they tell you to go home and wait?
No, they just said for me to wait, not hear probably from Harrisburg. That's what.
Did they tell you how long you would have to wait?
No,
Did they tell you what you were waiting for?
not really, no.
And so then you drove the hour home with your
Yes.
daughter.
Yeah, we really didn't know. That was kind of a wasted trip, really. It were 2 wasted trips. Yes.
And how long was it till you heard anything from the state about your ID?
I'd say it was a couple days anyway.
Let's mark this as Marsh 7. Last document. This is marked as Marsh Exhibit 7. Is this the letter you eventually received from PennDOT?
Yes.
What's the date at the top there?
September 24th.
Did you receive it after that date?
Did I receive what?
Did you receive this letter after September 24th?
Yes, I'd say a couple days after it was dated, yes.
And this letter tells you that you can now return to the licensing center in Rochester for a
Right.
third time?
That's correct.
And that you can get your ID?
Yes.
And did you make a third trip to Rochester?
Yes, we did.
And I note in the 4th paragraph of this letter, there's a person and a number to call. Did you or somebody on your behalf call that number before you went?
I don't really know. I don't know if Susie did or not, but Barbara didn't. I know, my daughter.
Okay. And do you remember when you went out?
Went back the third time. It was, I'd say in October sometime. October 2nd maybe. Yes.
And drive any shorter
No.
on the third trip?
No,
No, they hadn't moved it any closer.
no,
Your daughter drive faster?
no, no.
So you took the hour trip out. And
Right.
how'd things go this time?
They went much better, yes.
Did it seem like they were waiting for you?
It did seem in a way, yes.
And why do you say that?
Well, it's just like everybody was willing to help right away. And a fella came from the back that I thought maybe was the manager of the place or something like that, and he helped a lot. He was very nice.
And so did you get an ID on this day?
Yes, yes.
And you now have an ID.
Voter's ID card, yes.
Is that a Department of State ID?
Yes.
And you still have it?
Yes, I do.
And so you can use that to vote from now on.
Right.
You spent a fair bit of time trying to get
Trying
this
to get
ID.
it, yes. Yes, I was glad I was well enough to make those 3 trips.
And you plan on voting in November?
Absolutely.
And how far away is your polling place from here?
Ooh, let's see, it's in Hanover Township. I'd say maybe 10 mile?
So I'm assuming that based upon the fact you said it's 10 miles away, that you drive there.
Well, I go with my daughter, yeah.
So your daughter takes you
Yes,
to vote.
yes,
So do you rely on family members
sure.
to take you places?
Yes, I do.
And primarily the home that you live in, you live with your daughter?
Yes,
Okay. And who else resides here?
her husband.
Okay. And do both of them take you places when you need to go?
Sure.
And Miss Marsh, how did you become involved as a witness in this lawsuit?
I think my grandson asked me if I would. Ian, he works for the ACLU.
And Miss Marsh, how far have you traveled in the last 2 years? How far? What's the farthest place
Oh,
that you've traveled
geez,
to?
not very far. I'd say Natrona Heights, from here to Natrona Heights.
And Miss Marsh, how far away is that?
Oh, my. I went up to see a surgeon up there. I think it took us a good hour and a half to get there or more, yes.
And that was driving?
Yeah, my son-in-law took me
Okay.
and my daughter.
So that's the furthest trip that you've taken?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
And you mentioned was it your son or your son-in-law who drove
Who lives
you?
here? My son-in-law.
Okay. Well, who drove you that day?
Up to Natrona Heights?
Yes,
My
ma'am.
son-in-law,
Okay.
Fred Smith.
And how often do you travel from your home in an ordinary week? Like to take a trip, for example, to the doctor or to the grocery store?
How often?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, maybe once a week.
Ms. Marsh, I'm going to ask you about your third and successful attempt to get an identification. I'm sort of going to go in reverse order. You said that when you arrived that third time, and that would have been sometime after September 24th,
Right.
that when you arrived at the PennDOT Center, that the individuals there were, I believe you described it as eager and willing to
Yes.
help you.
Yes.
At that time, can you tell me in a little bit more detail what they did for you to get you that ID?
Well, they apparently knew why I was there. So, like, I thought I'd have to show some different identifications and everything, and I really didn't need to in the end, you know. And I wasn't in there very long, and they asked me a few questions. I just forget about which ones, I mean. And anyways, and then they took my picture and, you know, gave me the card.
And Ms. Marsh, what did you have with you at that time in terms of documents?
A bank statement and like proof of where I lived, you know.
Okay. And would that proof of residency be the form that your granddaughter obtained for you from the Department of State, that voter ID question that...
Let's see, Well, one I know was my bank statement, and that was kind of a proof. And the other, let's see, it might have been, well, I had a couple like bills that I could show, like Macy's. I have a bill with Macy's, and I had their address or bill there.
And then at that time, that appeared, the information in the documents that you had were enough
Yes.
to obtain that
Yes.
Department of State ID.
Yes.
And you did successfully obtain a Department of State identification for voting purposes, correct?
Yes. Yes.